Good evening, my dear warrior of light. It's Yselda. Tonight, we continue our journey through the history of Eorzea, the War of the Magi now past, and with it, the tide of the Sixth Umbral Calamity, a deluge of such magnitude that it swept away the last great bastions of the Fifth Astral Era. The white stones of Amdapor were drowned and lost. The towers of Mark swallowed whole. Nim too vanished beneath the sea it once ruled, leaving naught but broken, floating isles. From this ruin, the world once more began to rise. The people of the realm, weary from centuries of strife, emerged into a time they believed might finally bring peace. They had endured the wrath of each of the six elements: flame, wind, lightning, ice, earth, and water. All had spent their fury. Surely, they reasoned, the worst was behind them. Those 16 long centuries would pass beneath the golden sun of the Sixth Astral Era. The world was not yet free from its cycles. A seventh calamity awaited, unlike anything that had come before. And so a question arises. If each of the six elements had given rise to their reckoning, what then was the nature of the seventh? To answer that, we must journey back to the early days of the Sixth Astral Era, when man once more began the long work of rebuilding, when seeds were sown in the still wet soil of a realm reborn, and when the first shadow of a formidable enemy began to stir. So, find yourself a cozy spot and let your breath slow. Allow yourself to be still as the moon rises high above Eorzea's lands. And if you're enjoying our little journeys through Eorzea's past, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Each one of you and each moment spent here means the world to me. Thank you again, and now, let's begin. Scholars would long debate what single act or decision led to the coming of the Seventh Umbral Calamity. Some trace the path to ancient magics, others to the pride of men, but none can deny the sequence of events that followed. A gathering storm whose eye was the plains of Carteneau. In the early centuries of the Sixth Astral Era, a time now remembered as the Age of Restoration, the wounds left by the calamity of water remained raw and weeping. The realm had barely survived the flood, and in its wake, fear held sway. Magic, once the proud foundation of civilization, was now feared as the architect of ruin. Across the land, ancient tomes were heaped into pyres. Spellcasters, whether proven or merely accused, were hunted down, branded as heretics, and met with grim ends. So deep ran the terror that even men of science, whose work bore no trace of spellcraft, found themselves mistaken for mages and cast into the flames. Knowledge, once the lantern of the Fifth Astral Era, was all but snuffed out. The proud city-states that had risen during the Age of Enlightenment were reduced to hollow ruins, their populations scattered to the winds. Stripped of structure and wisdom, the people turned to instinct. Survival became their creed. Families formed into clans, clans into tribes, and together they sought shelter wherever they could. Between the destruction wrought by the war of the Magi and that by the calamity of water, little remained of the Fifth Astral Era's city-states. Those who survived the chaos abandoned the shells of their once magnificent nations, choosing instead to establish small hamlets. Yet time, even in sorrow, moves ever onward. Around the year 400, a new rhythm stirred across the realm. This period, the Age of Communion, saw the long silent world begin to speak again. From distant shores, immigrants came, from Othard and Ilzabard, and from the scattered isles beyond the blood-brine sea. And with them came the Hyur, in 3 vast migratory waves that reshaped the very lands of Eorzea. Populations swelled, trade routes opened, and in that mingling of cultures and tongues, the quiet foundation of a new world was laid. In these years of rebirth, tensions flared anew. Racial discord reached a peak in this period, as the peoples of Eorzea, shaped by hardship and wary of difference, began to seek shelter among their own. The Allagan, long harried by encroaching outsiders, retreated to the cold highlands of Carthus, where they laid the foundations of Ishgard. The Lalafell, descendants of Marquis mages, ventured deep into the arid wilds of Thanalan, and there gave rise to the desert nation of Belardia. The Rogadin, drawn by the call of the sea, settled upon the island of Vilbrand, founding what would become Limsa Lominsa. But these migrations sowed seeds of strife. In Thanalan, disputes among the Lalafellan royal lines fractured Belardia from within. In time, the city fell, and from its ashes rose 2 rivals, Uldar and Sildi, twin powers born of ambition and bitterness. Yet the era was not without its moments of unity. In the great forest of the Black Shroud, the Hyur and the Allagan once stood divided until both were cast out by the forest's guardian elementals. In shared exile, they found common cause. Together, they raised the underground city of Gelmora, a haven hewn from stone, lit by the bonds of newfound kinship. In the centuries that followed, the city-states flourished, slowly regaining strength. But with growth came hunger for land, influence, and control. This was the dawn of the Age of Strife. Rivalry simmered and soon boiled over. Expansionist aims led to skirmishes in the borderlands, where indigenous beast tribes such as the kobolds and the Ixal rose in resistance. To them, these new powers were not pioneers. They were invaders. The land was their voice, and it cried out in fury. Uldar and Sildi, though born of the same soil, fell swiftly into discord. Long years of petty warfare followed, so long indeed that their people forgot the cause for which they fought. And still, the conflict dragged on, a bitter echo of glories long past. As bloody conflicts erupted across the land, the balance of power began to shift once more. Rivers ran red with the blood of war, while gold passed swiftly from the hands of the ambitious into the pockets of sellswords and mercenaries. In the burning heart of Thanalan, Uldar emerged triumphant, bringing an end to its long feud with Sildi by razing the once proud sister city to rubble. To the east, the scattered warring tribes of Gyr Abania were at last united beneath the highland Hyur. From their unification rose a new power, the city-state of Alamigo, forged through conquest and held firm by discipline. In the west, advances in shipbuilding swelled the maritime might of Limsalominsa. Trade with faraway nations flourished, and the seafaring city blossomed into a thriving port of wealth and many tongues. Meanwhile, deep within the Black Shroud, the people of Gelmora toiled still in shadow. After long centuries of study, they at last succeeded in using conjury to commune with the elementals and were granted the forest's blessing. In that same span, the spirits, enraged by the bloodshed of the exile, cast the tribe beyond the shroud's sacred boundary, the hedge. Freed from their underground refuge and unburdened by their former foes, the people of Gelmora stepped into the light, founding a new city in harmony with the wood, Gridania. From the year 1300, a new peace began to bloom. This was the age of stability. Wearied by centuries of war, the people of Eorzea turned at last to diplomacy. Commerce flourished once more across the borders, and the bonds between city-states slowly healed. The sharing of craft and knowledge brought about a golden flowering of culture, art, and ingenuity not seen since the heyday of the Fifth Astral Era. Limsalominsa, Gridania, Uldar, Ishgard, Alamigo, and Sharlayan each came into their own, standing tall as pillars of civilization. In a world once ruled by flame and flood, peace for a time reigned. In this time, a new light shone across the land, the light of knowledge. From the distant isles of the northern seas came the Sharlayans, a people of wisdom and learning, who journeyed south and east into the northern wastes to settle upon Eorzean soil. Their mission was of one purpose alone: to restore the wisdom of the ancients and, through tireless study, illuminate a realm still dimmed by the shadows of the past. It was through their research that the secrets of teleportative ether were rediscovered, and the great network of etherites, the Ethernet, once more linked city to city. In this time, independent craftsmen and warriors, wary of these shifting winds, began to gather. Fearing their trades might be rendered obsolete by foreign customs and techniques, they formed guilds, not only to preserve their ancestral knowledge, but to forge economic bonds that might shield them from uncertainty. But where coin flows, discord often follows. Alamigo, bold and brimming with ambition, saw the illusion of stability as opportunity. In a bid to expand its dominion, the Highland nation launched a series of aggressive campaigns into the Black Shroud. These incursions sparked what would come to be known as the Autumn War. Though the conjurers of Gridania had refined their techniques since the days of Gelmora, their magics were no match for the hardened legions of Alamigo. The city seemed doomed to fall until the unexpected occurred. In an act of rare unity, the armies of Ishgard, Uldar, and Limsalominsa rose in Gridania's defense. Their intervention turned the tide. Borders were redrawn, treaties signed. Though the cities remained sovereign, a silent accord was struck. No single power would be permitted to rise unchecked. And so peace once more returned to the realm. Tenuous, hard-won, and soon to be tested. For beyond the shores of Uldanard, a different fire began to smoulder. The fire of conquest. To the north, on the frozen reaches of Ilzabard, the Republic of Garlemald rose with unsettling speed. Fueled by their mastery of magitech and iron war machina, the Garleans swept across the continent, overwhelming neighbouring nations and extinguishing cultures like candles in a gale. Their march was relentless. In the year 1552 of the Sixth Astral Era, the Republic's leader, Solus Oscalvus, crowned himself emperor and declared the birth of the Garlean Empire. Armed with legions drawn from countless assimilated peoples, the empire turned its might eastward. Nation after nation fell as Othard was methodically subjugated, and the last lights of resistance in Ilsabard were extinguished. Those who bent the knee were offered a place beneath the imperial banner. Those who did not vanished. With two of the three great continents now bound in chains, the Garleans cast their gaze upon Eorzea. In 1557, the 14th Legion set foot in Alamigo, the Empire's spear point in the west. The city-state, riven by internal strife, fell with alarming ease, the first to be claimed in Garlemald's bid to bring the realm to heel. The fall of Alamigo sent shockwaves across Eorzea. No longer could the remaining free peoples stand apart. In 1561, the four great city-states, Limsalominsa, Uldar, Gridania, and Ishgard, set aside their differences and forged an alliance, a pact born out of necessity in a desperate bid to halt the Empire's advance. Not all Eorzeans, however, chose to fight. The Sharlians, ever averse to war, refused to join the alliance. In a final act of diplomacy, envoys were dispatched to the imperial court. But their pleas for peace were met with silence. Spurned, the Forum made plans to abandon the colony in the Dravanian hinterlands. The scholars would return across the seas to their home in the northern wastes, leaving behind empty halls and silent libraries, a farewell not only to their adopted home, but perhaps to an age of reason. With Alamigo firmly yoked beneath the imperial banner, its coin, customs and governance now bent to Garlemald's will, the 14th Legion turned its eye to the next phase of conquest. The campaign to claim Eorzea pressed on in earnest. In the year 1562 of the Sixth Astral Era, the Empire's ambitions drove a fleet, escorted by the mighty flagship Agrius, into the heart of Mordona, towards the shimmering waters of Silvertear Falls. Whilst no city-state rose to challenge them, the resistance they encountered there was far older and far more terrible. From the mists above the lake soared Midgardzoma, ancient guardian of Silvertear, long thought dormant. Roused by encroachment of warships, the great worm cried out, and his brood answered. A host of dragons took to the skies, and there, in a tempest of fire and steel, the battle of Silvertear skies unfolded. The clash ended in mutual ruin, as Midgardzoma entwined the Agrius in a final, fatal embrace. Worm and warship alike were dashed upon the earth. The Garlean fleet was broken, and the 14th Legion, reeling from the loss, was forced into retreat. Yet the Battle of Silvertear Skies marked not the end, but the beginning of something far more terrible and long-lasting. In the shadow of the Worm's Fall, a troubling phenomenon stirred across the land. The beast tribes of Eorzea, driven by fear, faith, or fury, began summoning forth their gods. These entities, immense, divine, and wrathful, would come to be known as primals. The Garleans, ever skeptical of the divine, named them icons. To the Empire, they were a threat to order. Gaius van Belsar, legatus of the 14th, soon realized the futility of conventional war against these primals. These so-called gods, even when felled, could be summoned anew through crystals and fervent devotion. Worse still, their presence twisted the minds of mortals, converting men to zealots willing to betray kith and kin in the name of their chosen divinity, a condition now known as tempering. Lacking the means to permanently banish these entities, and seeing no path forward in Eorzea's unstable theatre, Emperor Solus Soscalvus gave his command to suspend the Eorzean campaign. The conquest would wait. Following the cataclysm at Silvertear, with the Garlean invasion stalled, the Holy See of Ishgard announced its formal withdrawal from the Eorzean alliance. Citing the Empire's apparent cessation of hostilities and unwilling to divert troops from the grueling Dragonsong War, the Sea resolved to focus its resources inward, ever wary of Nidhogg's growing wrath. And in the east, the 14th Legion turned to entrenchment. Belsar's wall began to rise along the border of Gir Abania and the Black Shroud, separating conquered lands from those yet free. Whether it was to stand as a prelude to renewed invasion, or a means to quarantine a realm riddled with primal worship, none could say for certain. And as imperial ambitions cooled, the lights of Sharlayan dimmed. After 5 years of careful preparation, the scholars of the Dravanian hinterlands, disillusioned by Eorzea's descent into militarism, embarked upon their long-awaited exodus. In a single night, they vanished. Laboratories, libraries, entire neighborhoods stood abandoned, a bastion of reason lost to silence. Eorzea, bereft of her wisest minds and facing threats both mortal and mythic, would be left to weather what storms remained. However, one man turned his gaze toward the stars and the realm's uncertain fate. As these scholars silently withdrew to their home in the northern reaches of the Old World, within the marble halls of Sharlayan, the Archon Louisoix Le Veilleur quietly gathered 12 of his most gifted pupils. Learned in the histories of Eorzea and the theories of her ethereal balance, these scholars bound themselves to a single cause: the salvation of the realm. Thus was the Circle of Knowing born. Unwilling to abide the Forum's passive stance, and convinced that the realm's survival required more than silent scholarship, Louisoix and his followers vowed to act through more discreet means. They would walk the path of intervention, unseen, yet unwavering. The Archon understood what others dared not admit: that if Eorzea was to stand against the Garlean Empire, the old city-states would have to rekindle the flames of unity. Louisoix sent his companions abroad to Limsa-Lominsa, Gridania, and Uldar with a singular aim: to urge each nation to revive its grand company. Once, in the twilight of the Fifth Astral Era, these grand companies had seen the evacuation of the people as floodwaters rose and ruin approached. Now, Louisoix hoped they might serve again, as unified centres of military, economic, and logistical power, in preparation for a new and looming crisis. It was a plea met first with hesitation. The city-states had grown suspicious, wary after centuries of rivalry and war. The imperial threat had ebbed behind Belsar's wall, and without a clear enemy, few saw the need to reforge ancient alliances. Instead, their attention turned to more immediate troubles: the Beast Tribes. Since the fall of Midgardsormr at Silvertear Skies, the Beastmen had grown emboldened. Across the realm they turned to prayer, to rite, and to crystal, summoning forth beings they revered as gods, drawn from the deepest myths of their kind. To scholars they were primals. To tribes, they were the first beings, avatars of ancestry and living proof of divine covenant. And so, while Louisoix and the Circle of Knowing laboured to unite the races of men, the ethereal fabric of the realm began to strain beneath the weight of old gods newly born. A particularly alarming incident occurred in the year 1564, when the flames of conflict flared anew in the scorched reaches of southern Thanalan. From the cracked plains of Pagalthan rose the war cries of the Amaljar, driven to desperation and wrath. In a fervent rite fueled by stolen crystals and ancestral fury, the Beast Tribe summoned forth their god, Ifrit, the Lord of the Inferno. His blazing form erupted upon the land in a storm of flame and fury, laying waste to the mithril diggings of the Amagina and Sons mineral concern. As Uldan garrisons faltered, the Amaljar swept through Zanrak, reclaiming their sacred lands in the name of fire and vengeance. But this was not an isolated incident. Far to the west upon the island of Vilbrand, the kobolds beneath the mountains and the Sahagin of the sea were unearthing ancient rites of their own. With wordless song and stolen crystal, they too began to summon forth the avatars of their devotion, primals of earth and wave. Eorzea stirred with unease, for these beings were not mere myth. They walked the land. They demanded fealty, and they would not be denied. Where fear took root in the hearts of many, others saw only glory. From among the mead halls and mercenary dens of Limsa rose a band of irrepressible warriors who called themselves the Company of Heroes. With blades, magics, and no small measure of bravado, they sought out the self-proclaimed gods who plagued the realm and brought them low. Tales of their deeds spread like wildfire, triumphs wrought against Leviathan, against Titan, against unspeakable might. And yet, for all their valour, nothing changed. No sooner had one primal been vanquished than another was born anew. Each summoning leached ether from the land, draining the world of its elemental lifeblood. Fields withered, springs turned brackish, skies hung heavy with imbalance. The Circle of Knowing, ever watchful, were the first to see the pattern, the deeper cost hidden beneath the spectacle. If this cycle continued, the realm itself would fade into lifeless ash. To understand the source of this blight, the Archons turned to their brethren, the students of Baldessian. With ink-stained hands and sleepless minds, they combed the forgotten archives of ages past, unearthing fragments of an ancient truth. A name, whispered in shadow. The Ascians, ageless, formless, and, if the evidence was to be believed, the true authors of this unfolding tale of ruin. Though the true designs of the Ascians remained veiled in shadow, the urgency of the hour left little time for speculation. Their name alone was cause for deep concern. Despite the Circle of Knowing's findings being incomplete, Louisoix and his Archons approached the leaders of Eorzea city-states with what little they had uncovered. To their astonishment, the warning was heeded. The city-states, long mired in rivalries, resentments, and the scars of history, looked past their grievances. The threat was too great, the cost of inaction too dear. They agreed to act swiftly, and in doing so, acknowledged the circle of knowing as a guiding flame in Eorzea's darkest hour. The Archons had stepped out from the wings of history and into its light, becoming the architects of a realm-wide response to the rising primal threat. Yet, as one shadow was cast back, another loomed greater still. By the year 1570, the sky above Belsar's wall began to darken. Imperial airships of the 14th Legion occupied the heavens, their silhouettes blotting the sun from the highlands. Though no full-scale invasion followed, the disruption of trade routes and the cessation of commercial flights cast a pall over Eorzea. Tension simmered, the quiet before the storm. 2 years later, the storm broke. Nael van Darnus, legatus of the 7th Imperial Legion, marched into Alamigo, his banners red with ambition. There, he joined forces with Gaius van Belsar, doubling the Imperial presence in the realm and confirming the worst fears of the Eorzean alliance. No longer could the city-states cling to cautious neutrality or wishful diplomacy. The enemy had returned, and with him, a dreadful new resolve. With grim purpose, the nations moved as one. The Circle's call to restore the Grand Companies was no longer a plea, but a necessity. From the coasts of Vilbrand to the sands of Thanalan, from the bows of the Black Shroud to the peaks of Kurthus, the banners were raised once more. The maelstrom of Limsalominsa, the immortal flames of Uldar, the Order of the Twin Adder in Gridania, each a pillar of strength, each a testament to Eorzea's will to survive. To mark the rebirth of the Grand Companies, the city-states held grand ceremonies, majestic spectacles cast in the colours of power and pride. Beneath fluttering banners and the gaze of marble statues, throngs gathered in streets alive with song and fervour. The ruling elite spared no expense, adorning their cities in splendour, not merely to commemorate the occasion, but to stir the hearts of their people. From towering stages, marshals and generals, draped in battle regalia, raised their voices above the roar of the crowd. Their words, bright as flame and sharp as steel, sought to ignite a passion within all who listened. They spoke of duty, of unity, and of the realm's uncertain future, of threats from beyond the borders, and shadows stirring within. But it was not to the common folk alone that their entreaties were cast. At the time when the imperial threat was seemingly in abeyance, the Eorzean alliance, once galvanized by shared fear, had unravelled. Armies were stood down and soldiers sent home. Peace, though welcome, left many unmoored. Veterans, mercenaries, and conscripts, hardened by years of conflict, now found themselves without purpose. It was in this void that a new movement took root, the Adventurers' Guild. Born of necessity and tempered by experience, these guilds provided structure and opportunity to the displaced. Where once they marched in ranks, they now charted their own paths, taking contracts, guarding caravans, hunting beasts, and reclaiming the wilds lost in the age of strife. The guilds quickly spread, their banners unfurling in each of Eorzea's city-states. Taverns became waystations for fate and fortune alike. Within those smoke-filled halls, strangers gathered by hearthlight, swapping stories, sharing intelligence, and taking up arms in service of causes great and small. Thus began the Age of Adventure, a chapter of nameless heroes and wandering souls. A new kind of warrior walked the realm, unbound by banner, free of throne, and destined to shape the fate of Eorzea anew. The grand companies turned their eyes to those whose blades had long danced with fate. These same adventurers, wanderers of the wilds, warriors without master, those who lived by steel and story. Knowing well the skill and spirit these souls possessed, the companies crafted divisions tailored to their talents, extending offers wrapped in coin and honor. Each company sought to outshine the other. Each vied for their mightiest of names. And so, within the ranks of the Maelstrom, the Immortal Flames, and the Order of the Twin Adder, new banners were raised. The time for revelry had passed. The time for reckoning was near. When the White Raven arrived in the western front, the wind itself seemed to whisper a foreboding. Nel Vandanus, legatus of the 7th Imperial Legion, cut a singular figure in the field, his polished plate gleaming like moonlight on a raven's wing. A child of Garlemald's war-born aristocracy, he had been bred for conquest, his early years shaped by discipline, legacy, and ambition. His father, a decorated hero in the campaigns that forged the Empire, had scarcely drawn his final breath before Niall seized the reins of command. His first decree was swift and brutal, the public execution of his father's most trusted advisors. With this single act, the younger Vandanus cast off the long shadow of his bloodline and set himself apart from his father as a ruthless and unapologetic figure. Whispers soon followed that the illness which carried his father to the grave had come too suddenly, that Nell's rise had been sharpened by poison and premeditation. But no court dared to try him, and no voice within the Empire rose in protest. Rank, power, and fear made for an impenetrable shield. Under his command, the 7th Legion became a force without equal. In the eastern reaches of Othard, kingdom after kingdom fell beneath their banners. Nail's campaigns were as swift as they were merciless, and in time, his victory stirred the gaze of the Emperor himself. Solus Soscalvus, now deep in his 8th decade, declared Vandanus a commander of extraordinary caliber, one who might carry Garlemald's banner over the final frontier, Eorzea. In the year 1572 of the Sixth Astral Era, the Emperor, though aged, remained possessed of unyielding ambition. The 3 great continents had been bound by war and blood, but true unity eluded him still. With the political annexation of Othard complete, his thoughts returned to Uldanard and its obstinate city-states, whose false gods, the Icons, resisted assimilation and fanned the flames of defiance. It was then that the White Raven came forward, drawing upon ancient knowledge passed down through House Darnus, knowledge of Allagan artifacts and forbidden power. Niall proposed a solution to the Icon dilemma. He promised the eradication of the primals through means lost to the ages. The Emperor listened, and he approved. And thus did the wheel begin to turn. Unseen and inexorable, it would grind ever onward, toward an end that none in Eorzea could yet imagine, toward the 7th Umbral Calamity. In the 41st year of Emperor Solus Soscalvus's reign, 10 summers before Niall Vandanus would set foot on Eorzean soil, a a shadowy project was undertaken in secret, charged with solving the growing threat of icons. The Empire's Grand Minister of Industry, Midas nan Garlemald, proposed a daring venture to the imperial court. Drawing from ancient records gleaned from Allagan relics acquired through the patronage of House Darnus, Garlemald presented a theory both tantalizing and perilous: that the lesser moon, Dalamud, long revered as a celestial body of divine origin, was in truth a satellite of Allagan design. Though the records were incomplete, fragments alluded to the Allagans' own conflict with the icons and the devastating methods they had once used to overcome them. Within Dalamud, Midas believed, lay a vast reservoir of energy, dormant yet intact. If this satellite could be drawn down from the heavens and repurposed, it could serve as a weapon unlike any other, a falling star to end all threats. Thus was born the Meteor Project. The proposal was met with swift approval. Eager to exploit this forgotten power, the Imperial Court sanctioned the first test, a transmission from Boja Citadel, using Allagan conductors to establish contact with the artificial moon. But what followed was not revelation, it was ruin. Dalamud responded. A beam of incandescent energy built upon 5 millennia of stored ether lanced from the sky. In a heartbeat, Boja was erased. Citadel, citizen, and sky consumed by a light too bright to bear. Nothing remained but scorched ruin and silence. The Empire attempted to bury the truth, yet a city does not vanish without notice. Despite the efforts of Imperial censors to hide the event from public scrutiny, word of the catastrophe spread across Hydaelyn, and the world came to know it by another name: the Boja Incident. The death of Midas nan Garlemald, the destruction of the lunar transmitter, and the loss of Boja Citadel's Allagan archives seemed to mark the end of the Meteor Project. Publicly, the Empire condemned the experiment as reckless folly. With its failure laid bare in fire and ash, Solus Oscalvus declared that he had no desire to wield power so unpredictable. But one man could not let it go. Nell Van Darnus, heir to the very house that had sponsored the original research, refused to see the legacy of House Darnus consigned to oblivion. The White Raven had always believed Dalamud held the key to reshaping the realm, and now, deployed to the Western Front, he saw his chance to revive the project in full. Presenting new findings to the now elderly and ailing Emperor, Nell claimed to have discovered a method by which the Allagan satellite might be controlled. Its descent no longer a chaotic burst of ruin, but a guided hand of purification. Eorzea, he argued, could be cleansed. Beast tribes, primals, and their heretical gods eradicated in fire from above. Eager to cement his legacy before death, Solus relented. The Meteor Project was resurrected. To facilitate Dalamud's fall, the Empire began amassing ethereal energy across the realm. Crystals, innumerable in quantity, were seized from mines and deposits, while Imperials descended upon zones of high etheric density: Totorak in the Black Shroud, Zemel Darkhold in Kurthus. Excavations were launched to unearth what remained of Allagan relics, their secrets vital to ensuring the project's success. And in the sky above Eorzea, Dalamud began to change. The lesser moon, once pale and distant, now bled with crimson light, growing steadily brighter as if stirred from slumber. The grand companies, though unaware of the Empire's true designs, could not ignore the sudden escalation. Squadrons of adventurers were dispatched to repel the 7th Legion's incursions. Through coordinated resistance, the occupied territories were reclaimed. Yet, the Empire was not the only enemy to threaten the peace of Eorzea. The primal threat, long simmering beneath the surface, began to surge once more. Louisoix Le Veilleur returned to the realm, recognizing that the beast tribe's growing desperation mirrored the Empire's advance. Wherever Garlean steel marched, the summoning of gods soon followed. Determined to convince the Grand Companies that victory hinged not only on defeating the Empire, but also addressing the primals, Louisoix crossed the realm to make his case. But even the best laid plans were met with ruin. As adventurers moved to confront Ifrit, they were halted not by flame, but by iron. Nael van Darnus appeared unbidden within the primal sanctum, his halberd carving through the very fabric of the Aether, driving the primal into retreat. The White Raven had begun to manipulate etheric currents directly, exploiting the bond between realm and god for his own ends. In the Black Shroud, the Moogle summoned forth the spectral memory of good King Mogulmog XII, a monarch lost to time and tale, now twisted into violent regency. The Ixal, long aggrieved by their exile, called upon Garuda, the shrieking fury of the wind. Elsewhere across the realm, more primals awoke. Under Louisoix's guidance, adventurers rose to meet these threats. Each primal was felled, but each time the result was the same. Their dissipating ether did not return to the land. It was instead drawn skyward, into the blood-red glow of Dalamud. The truth became clear. Every death was feeding the moon. The realm was dying, one battle at a time. Amidst this chaos, the Garlean legions moved with purpose. In the shadow of Silvertear Falls, the 7th and 14th Legions completed construction of Castrum Novum, a fortress unlike any other. Within it, a new transmitter, a replica of the device lost at Boja. The Empire had rebuilt the Meteor Project. But where Imperial might failed, betrayal sowed hope. Sid Nan Garland, Master Engineer and former Minister of Industry, fled the Empire. Rejecting its brutal march of conquest, he sought asylum in Eorzea. With him came a contingent of his loyal and brilliant engineers and researchers, and a deep understanding of the magitech weaponry that now threatened the world. The knowledge he brought would become invaluable in the days to come, for the lesser moon Dalamud, now turned crimson, was beginning to fall. Garland had seen the signs. Intercepted Imperial schematics confirmed his fears. Within the heart of Castrum Novum, the Garleans had completed a functional lunar transmitter, its crystal lattice already engaged. Dalamud was drawing closer to Eorzea, not by gravity, but by design. And no one knew this truth better than he, for Sid Nan Garland was the son of Midas Nan Garland, the brilliant mind behind the first ill-fated Meteor Project. His father's legacy, once buried beneath the ashes of Boja Citadel, had been exhumed by the White Raven. Time was of the essence. Sid turned to the leaders of Eorzea city-states, warning them of the lunar transmitter's purpose. In response, the Eorzean alliance, long dormant, was swiftly rekindled. The banners of Gridania, Uldar, and Limsa Lominsa flew once more side by side. The grand companies mobilized, pooling their strength for one purpose: to strike the castrum before it was too late. Their plan was audacious. A contingent of Grand Company soldiers would launch a frontal assault on Castrum Novum's gates, drawing Garlean forces into the open. At the same time, a hand-picked fellowship of adventurers would infiltrate the fortress's rear, slipping past sentries and magitech to destroy the ceruleum generators fueling the transmitter. It was a desperate gambit, and it worked. The adventurers pressed deep into the castrum, battling patrols, sabotaging supply lines, and finally reaching the inner sanctum. There, in a chamber humming with stored ether, the ceruleum cores were struck down, the transmitter buckled, and with a thunderous roar, it burned. For the first time in moons, hope flickered in the hearts of Eorzeans. But victory was fleeting. Nael Vandarnus appeared amidst the chaos. Before the stunned adventurers, his words were a tirade drenched in madness, declaring the failure of the alliance irrelevant. The transmitter, he claimed, had served its purpose. Dalamud no longer required guidance. It was falling of its own accord. Then, without striking a single blow, he vanished. In the days that followed, Eorzean astrologians confirmed what the White Raven had declared. The lesser moon continued its descent, undeterred. The calamity had not been averted. It had entered its next stage. Reconnaissance quickly traced Vandarnus's movements northward. It was believed the legators had made for the lowlands of Curthus. The Circle of Knowing contributed their own findings, ancient records linking Dalamud to the ruins of Allag, and to a place known as the Fields of Glory. The truth began to coalesce. The Garleans had never intended to rely on a single transmitter. What Vandarnus sought now lay buried beneath the snows of the Western Highlands, and the final act of this tragedy was about to begin. 3 reconnaissance units, each representing one of the Grand Companies, were dispatched to the eastern lowlands of Curthus in search of Nael Vandarnus, but none would return. Their final transmission spoke of a sky set ablaze by streaks of fire, as fragments of the lesser moon rained down upon their positions. These falling stars were no natural phenomenon, but rather a deliberate and calculated barrage targeted with uncanny precision. In the wake of their loss, observers stationed nearby reported a troubling sight. A series of floating islets had emerged above the plains, suspended in defiance of gravity. At the center of these crags stood a towering ruin, emitting a brilliant pillar of light that reached skyward, connecting Earth to Moon in much the same manner as the destroyed lunar transmitter at Castrum Novum. These, it was realized, were the ancient Allagan ruins described in the Archon's reports, remnants of an empire long past, repurposed now for catastrophe. Faced with this revelation, the Eorzean alliance convened in urgency. There would be no diplomacy, no further reconnaissance. If the realm were to survive, the White Raven would need to be felled, swiftly and absolutely. A volunteer band of adventurers stepped forward to take on the perilous charge. With the support of Sidnan Garland and his airship Enterprise, the company set course for the heart of the floating islets, Riven Road. There, atop that shattered skyborne realm, the adventurers engaged Vandarnus in what would become one of the most pivotal battles of the Sixth Astral Era. Though the legators fought with the fury of a man possessed, driven by madness, ambition, or both, he would fall to Eorzea's champions. The White Raven was no more. As the floating crags crumbled behind them, strewing debris across the lowlands below, the Enterprise carried the weary victors back to Gridania. The Council of Leaders received the news with joy and relief. After so long, the threat had seemingly passed. The realm, it was believed, had been delivered from the brink. But that belief too would prove premature. Though Nail Van Darnus had been slain and the floating Allagan ruins scattered to the winds, the lesser moon remained fixed upon its ominous descent. The skies did not clear. The red star did not falter. The end, it seemed, had merely been delayed. It was the Circle of Knowing who delivered these dismal tidings. Dalamud continued to fall, its etheric pulse now unbound, no longer held in check by the transmitter nor the legatus who once commanded it. Panic swept through the headquarters of the Grand Companies. Military councils convened in haste, but no strategy could be devised against a falling star. Amidst the turmoil, one voice rose above the rest. Archon Louisoix Leveilleur stepped forward with a proposal that was, by all accounts, as unorthodox as it was desperate. He spoke of the 12, the patron deities of Eorzea, long venerated in temple and prayer, but never before summoned in living memory. Louisoix believed that only by appealing to these divine beings directly might the realm stand a chance of survival. His plan was to perform a great invocation, a solemn ritual to entreat the 12 not as gods to be worshipped, but as guardians to lend their strength in this hour of need, to halt Dalamud's fall and seal away the terrible power it carried. The proposal was met with unease. Some feared that calling upon the 12 in such a manner would render the people no different from the beast tribes who summoned their primals, false gods wrought of ether and desire. Others questioned the danger of enthralling the realm to new deific powers should the invocation go awry. Would the 12, once summoned, claim the minds and wills of Eorzeans as the primals did their own? Louisoix, ever the measured sage, dispelled these doubts. He assured his peers that his invocation was no act of primal conjuring. He sought no corporeal avatars, no battle-born deities. Instead, he proposed a rite of faith and resonance, one that would reach out to the divine, not to bind them to the world, but to beg their favor in safeguarding it. And so, as Dalamud burned brighter in the heavens and the end loomed nearer with each passing day, the Archon set his course. To save Eorzea, he would call upon the gods themselves. The leaders of the Eorzean alliance accepted the gamble that Archon Louisoix had laid before them, knowing full well the stakes. Yet even amidst their vows of resolve, a shadow hung heavy upon the hearts of all. For history had shown again and again that no age of light endured forever. Each astral era, no matter how radiant, had always given way to umbral dark. Still, hope found form in action. The Circle of Knowing, guided by Louisoix's unwavering hand, set about preparing the invocation. To ensure its success, they turned to the adventurers, those brave souls who had stood against primals and empire alike. These chosen few were asked to embark on a sacred pilgrimage, visiting the marks of the 12 scattered across the realm. There, they were to kneel in reverence and call upon the gods to awaken their presence in the hearts of men. The Grand Companies, too, did their part. From Uldar to Gridania to Limsa Lominsa, officers and commanders rallied their citizens, leading mass prayers to their patron deities. It was said that in those final days, all of Eorzea raised their voices to the heavens as one. Beneath the looming shadow of Dalamud, a fractured realm stood united. But Eorzea's enemies had not fallen silent. Even as the people prayed and the adventurers pressed on with their pilgrimage, troubling news reached the Alliance. The remnants of the 7th Imperial Legion, now leaderless and unhinged, were amassing in the plains of Carteneau, precisely where Dalamud was expected to make landfall. The warning came from the most unlikely of messengers. Gaius van Belsar, legatus of the 14th Legion, appeared before one of the adventurers on their journey. Van Belsar revealed that the 7th had descended into fanaticism, refusing to accept the death of Nail van Darnus. They claimed to act under his command still, as if the White Raven yet lived. According to Gaius, the 7th had entrenched themselves in Carteneau, determined to ensure that nothing, and no one, could prevent Dalamud's fall. With Gaius van Belsar's revelation, the Eorzean Alliance was faced with a dire new reality. The final invocation of Louisoix summoning could not be performed at a distance. It would require the adventurers to stand directly beneath the descending red moon, where, upon the plains of Carteneau, the remnants of the 7th Imperial Legion had entrenched themselves, mad with devotion to a falling commander and unwilling to relinquish their grip on destiny. Thus was the stage set for a battle that would echo through the annals of time. Upon the scorched earth and trampled fields of Carteneau, the fate of Eorzea would be decided. Hope and despair, light and ruin, these were the forces that would clash beneath the crimson eye of Dalamud. Each of the city-states prepared their armies for what all knew might be their final march. In Uldar, the defense of the city was entrusted to the brass blades and the Sultan Sworn as the immortal flames passed through the Gate of Thal. There was symbolism in this departure, for tradition held that those who stepped beyond Thal's gate were granted death but once, thus spared a second on the battlefield. Far to the west in Limsalo-Mincer, the ink had scarcely dried on the Galadian Accord when the Maelstrom began conscripting their allies. Notorious pirate bands, long considered little more than rabble, were elevated to the status of free companies, granted full martial authority in the fight for the realm. The Kraken's arms, the bloody executioners, and the sanguine sirens flew their colours proudly beneath the crimson banner, ready to spill blood for the seas and shores they called home. In the Black Shroud, the Order of the Twin Adder marched with quiet resolve. Elder Seedseer Khan-e Senna led the host herself, flanked by the Wood Whalers and the sure-eyed archers of the God's Quiver. Though a small contingent remained behind to safeguard Gridania's heart, the Elder Seedseer made it clear the time for hesitation had passed. Gridania would answer the realm's call. The three hosts advanced, each with their banners lifted high, their hearts steeled against the coming storm. All differences were set aside, for on the fields of Carteneau there would be no Uldan, no Leminson, no Gridanian, only Eorzeans bound by blood and purpose. Marching in step with the grand companies came a host of adventurers, seasoned warriors and spellcasters whose deeds had earned them weapons of renown and titles whispered with reverence. These were not soldiers bound by banner or coin, but chosen by fate itself to stand in Eorzea's final hour. The armies of the Eorzean Alliance mustered in northern Thanalan, and advanced in unison to Mordona, before sweeping westward to enter the plains of Carteneau. There, the remnants of the 7th Imperial Legion had entrenched themselves along the eastern ridge, while a detachment from Castrum Sentry moved in from behind, aiming to strike the Alliance from the rear. Anticipating such a maneuver, the commanders of the Alliance dispatched their most agile adventurers to intercept the flanking force, buying precious time for the main host to engage the Imperial front lines. The first pieces had moved across the board, and the Battle of Carteneau had begun. Steel clashed, and banners flew as vanguards collided, the din of war echoing beneath the blood-red sky. From a rocky outcropping that overlooked the fray, Archon Louisoix arrived and began the sacred rite to summon the 12, beseeching the gods to lend their power in repelling the crimson moon. For a time, the battle swayed between victors. The Alliance surged forward, only to be driven back. Yet, through sheer force of will, they held the line, until the next stage of Garlemald's plan was set into motion. A thunderous roar heralded the arrival of their trump card. 200 Reaper-class Magitech battle armors, each manned by a knight of the 7th Legion. These mechanical behemoths cut swathes through the battlefield, their etheric-powered weaponry rendering shields and steel alike useless. The tide turned sharply. The lines of the Alliance bent under the onslaught, and for a moment it seemed they might break. For the Eorzean Alliance, the Battle of Carteneau marked the first grand-scale mobilization uniting disparate forces under a single cause. Yet, for all their shared purpose, unity in spirit did not guarantee unity in action. Commanders wrestled with coordinating an army comprised of wildly divergent factions. Limsolomince's pirate-free companies fought with chaotic fervor, while Alamegan resistance cells among the Immortal Flames clung to guerrilla tactics ill-suited for open warfare. Even among the Grand Company's regulars, no common doctrine of war had yet taken root. In truth, the Eorzean host was less an army than a convocation of battalions bound together by desperation and resolve. When the Magitech Knights descended in their Reaper-class war machina, what cohesion remained was swiftly broken. Orders scattered like leaves in a gale, and each soldier fought for survival. Though the Alliance's numbers dwarfed those of the 7th Legion, their might could not be brought to bear in full. The Imperials, fewer in number, wielded the unrelenting discipline of a single command and the deadly precision of ether-fueled war engines. In this chaos, the adventurers emerged as the Alliance's saving grace. Those who had earlier been dispatched to delay the Legion's flanking force at Castrum Sentry now arrived at the battlefield's heart. Veterans of skirmishers with Garlean steel and circuitry, they fell upon the Magitech host with deft precision. Their blades and spells turned the tide, forcing the Reapers back and sowing disarray in the 7th's once impenetrable formation. It was through their intervention that the Eorzean lines, bruised and broken, were pulled from the brink and rallied once more beneath the blood-hued sky. But none upon the field were prepared for the horror that would bring the hostilities to an end. As the moon reached the zenith of its descent and pierced the skies above Carteneau, a thunderous cracking echoed across the realm. From within the sundered shell of Dalamud, a vast and terrible force emerged. A colossal worm wreathed in fire and fury, its scales aglow like molten metal. The crimson moon was no natural satellite, nor even a simple Allagan weapon. It had been a prison, and within that celestial prison stirred the ancient terror thought lost to legend. Later accounts of archons of the Circle of Knowing would confirm what few could have imagined. The entity sealed within Dalamud was none other than the elder primal Bahamut, long thought destroyed. It was he who had been summoned 5,000 years prior by the dragons of Mericidia when their homeland came under siege by the armies of Allag. The Allagans, unable to slay the dreadworm, had instead bound him using arcane magics and imprisoned him within the fabricated moon, where he had lain dormant through the ages. But now, freed of his bonds and roused from slumber, Bahamut's vengeance knew no restraint. The elder primal soared above the sundered ruin of Dalamud and unleashed his wrath upon the realm below. Flame cascaded from the heavens, mountains melted, forests turned to ash. The sky itself was set ablaze. What had begun as the Battle of Carteneau became a massacre, friend and foe alike abandoning their banners and fleeing in terror before the coming of annihilation. And in that moment, Nael Van Darnas's mad ramblings found cruel vindication. He had known. The words he had once whispered to the moon were not nonsense, but a summons, an invocation to Bahamut, to awaken and break free. His destruction had always been a gift to the primal he revered. As molten shards rained down and all fled the field, one man alone remained steadfast. Amid the chaos and carnage, Archon Louisoix Leveilleur stood in silent vigil atop a promontory overlooking Carteneau. The sky burned, the land sundered, but the elder sage did not flee. His hands, raised in prayer, beckoned the 12. He would not allow the realm to fall without a final plea to the gods. The end had come, or so it seemed. Though Archon Louisoix could not turn back the red moon, neither would he permit Bahamut to scour the realm unchecked. In the final moments, he gathered the ether of the land itself, vast and furious, summoning it through the ancient conduit of his staff, Tupsamati. Joined with the fervent prayers of the realm's people, this energy coalesced into a final, desperate rite, a binding unlike any Eorzea had ever known. The divine sigils of the 12 blazed into being, etched across the sky in radiant glyphs of unimaginable intricacy. One by one, the great stone marks scattered across the land erupted in pillars of brilliant light, each a lance of divinity, hurled from the heavens. These spears of celestial power pierced the dreadworm's form, suspending him in place as the runes of sealing enclosed him in a cage of light. The skies above Carteneau shimmered with godly radiance, and for a breathless moment, it seemed the realm had been spared. And yet, what followed remains cloaked in mystery. No witness, no soldier nor sage could say with certainty what transpired when the god's light fully consumed the primal. Some say time itself stood still. Others speak of memories that slip like water through their grasp, dreams that fade upon waking. Scholars later surmised that the sheer magnitude of the rite, its potency drawn from both divine and terrestrial forces, had warped the memories of those who stood too close, their minds unable to withstand the strain. Only one truth endures. When the light faded, Bahamut was gone. The dreadworm's wrath had been stayed, but so too were the heroes that had helped make it so, vanished from the chronicles of history, their names lost to silence. Not a trace of their faces remained, save in the hearts of those who felt they had known them once long ago. When Bahamut became unbound, the Battle of Carteneau collapsed into ruinous chaos. The commanders of the Eorzean alliance, seeing the futility of continued resistance, issued the order to retreat, seeking to preserve what lives could yet be spared from the Dreadworm's wrath. Military records recount that General Roban Alden of the Immortal Flames hesitated at first. The adventurers had just turned the tide, and hope had briefly returned. Yet, the general relented when pressed by Khan Senna, elder seer of Gridania, who understood the dire truth. The battle was lost, and to remain would be to perish. With link pearls rendered useless by the overwhelming etheric interference radiating from Bahamut's emergence, messages could no longer be relayed across the realm by conventional means. Runners were dispatched on foot, their cries echoing across the shattered plain as they bore the command to withdraw. In Limsa-Lominsa, tales persist that Admiral Melwood Blufhiswan rode out upon her trusted chocobo steed Victory to call back the pirate companies who refused to abandon the field, blade still raised even as flame rained down from the sky. Yet, in truth, there was no victory to be claimed at Carteneau. The Grand Companies formally sounded the retreat, and the remnants of the 7th Imperial Legion, once feared for their ruthless conquests across the realm, crumbled. Scattered to the winds, they fled the battlefield, their cause lost. The survivors of the Alliance fell back to northern Thanalan, where the Immortal Flames hastily erected a provisional camp to tend to the wounded and account for the living. It was there that grim tallies were made, and names of the fallen whispered into the desert wind. The twin adders, however, did not return to the shroud. At the elder seer's behest, they remained in the field, forming search parties to scour the ruined plains. Friend and foe alike were lifted from the scorched earth, for Khan Senna's mercy knew no distinction. In those darkest hours, it was her compassion that salvaged what humanity could still be found upon the sundered soil of Carteneau. A gifted conjurer in her own right, she brought healing to many who would otherwise have been consigned to oblivion. It was not only on the blood-soaked plains of Carteneau that the calamity claimed its toll. The destruction wrought by Dalamud's shattering extended far beyond the battlefield. As the red moon broke apart in the skies above, its incandescent fragments rained upon the realm like falling stars, their descent heralding ruin across every corner of Eorzea, from the glacial reaches of Kurthus to the sun-scorched sands of Thanalan. In the coastal city of Limsa-Lominsa, disaster came from a titanic shard of the moon's outer shell as it plunged into the Ratano Sea just beyond the city's harbour, triggering a tidal wave that swept over the coastline. Entire districts were engulfed, and many lives were lost in the flood that followed. Elsewhere, Bahamut's emergence from his lunar prison gave rise to roiling firestorms and violent etheric surges, unleashed without pattern or purpose, reducing once thriving lands to smouldering ruin. And yet, amidst this inferno of chaos and despair, a miracle occurred. Survivors speak of a strange rebirth within the land itself. A sudden stillness, a breath drawn after cataclysm. Many believe it was the invocation of the 12, called forth by Archon Louisois Le Veilleur, that turned the tide. It was this divine miracle, they say, that vanquished Bahamut and spared the realm from absolute annihilation. Speculation and wonder surrounded the final moments of that fateful night. Countless accounts spoke of a radiant figure in the sky, a silhouette of fire and feathers blazing like a phoenix. though none could say for certain whether it was a vision sent by the gods or something more. The imagery became an enduring symbol of Eorzea's survival and rebirth. Archon Louisoir's body was never found in the aftermath. However, amid the rubble and scorched remains of Carteneau, Khan Senna herself uncovered fragments of Tupsimati, the legendary staff wielded by the Archon during the ritual. It was the only sign that he had ever stood there at all. The devastation at the heart of Bahamut's fury was absolute, leaving little behind to reconstruct the truth. So complete was the destruction, and so profound the magics unleashed, that what transpired that night remains shrouded in mystery. Generations of scholars and archons alike have since debated the nature of the final rite, and what role the gods may have played. But though records remain inconclusive, one truth endures. The realm was not destroyed, and for a people on the brink, that alone was miracle enough. Thus ended the Sixth Astral Era, and from the ashes of the Seventh Umbral Calamity, a new age began. Though the wounds left by Bahamut's fury ran deep, etched into the land and the hearts of her people, Eorzea endured, and in that endurance there bloomed the faintest glimmer of hope. Archon Louisoir's circle of knowing and the path of the 12 would come together to form the scions of the Seventh Dawn, who would watch over Eorzea as its people struggled to rebuild in the Seventh Umbral Era. They would oversee the activities of the Beast Tribes, the Garlean Empire, and the enigmatic Ascians. And in this era, they would forge a long-lasting alliance with the Warrior of Light. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with me in this journey through Eorzea's history. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with what you'd like to explore next. Your feedback means so much to me as I continue to grow my little corner here at the Cozy Chocobo. And now, as the echoes of the past grow still, may sleep take you gently, like a leaf upon the current, carried safely into dreams. Until next time, may you ever walk in the light of the crystal.